Thank you, everybody who is on the call this morning and for joining me here today, for joining us all here today. Um, before I got started here, as people were trickling in, I asked everybody to put in the chat box what type of property, if they have owned something in Oak Park or River Forest, what type of property is that? Is that a house? Is that an apartment building? That sort of thing. So the reason I am asking that to start off with is because my topic for today is going to cover all of those different sorts of buildings. I'll be talking about a collection that we have in the museum that we use for research very, very frequently. And for these listing sheets, I'll be talking about our real estate listing sheets. They cover all of these different types of buildings: condos, apartments, businesses, and of course houses. But houses are the most frequent thing that we do research on here, or at least that's the most frequent thing that people ask about. So I may use the word house as sort of a blanket term, and I want you all to forgive me about that because I am really talking about all of these different types of properties. We can find them through these listing sheets that I'll be talking about today. So please keep that in mind. So I'd like to start with a story from the south suburbs, actually, where I am from and where I currently live. So this story is not in particular about Oak Park or River Forest, but it's sort of universal. My dad was cleaning out some old files over the holidays and unearthed some snapshots of our family home that were taken by a realtor in the mid-'80s when my parents purchased their house. And it was really charming for me to see because it looked almost the same as what I've always known it to look like. But there were a few striking details that were missing. So I have always wondered why there's a very strange row of tulips that pops up in our yard right across the middle of our yard every spring. And these pictures told me why, because they showed a walkway down the middle of our front yard leading up to a set of steps in the front of our porch. And this is opposed to what I have always known. Our steps have been on the side of the porch for as long as anybody can remember. So this was kind of interesting to be able to solve that mystery. Real estate photos can really be taken for granted because you know very well what a building looks like when you first fall in love with it. But maybe after, say, 40 years and a steady stream of changes over that time, it's not so surprising that you'd forget details, such as my dad completely forgot that the stairs were on the front of the house instead of the side. So that's why I have such fond feelings for today's subject. And that is the most frequently accessed things in the research center here. I'm talking about the Historical Society's collection of real estate listing sheets. So these half-size sheets, I actually have one to hold up, just sort of a half slip of paper, or also some that are index card sized, are really a crash course in the history of buildings in Oak Park and River Forest. So this collection of literally thousands of listing sheets came to the Historical Society from two major local realtor groups, W.R. James in Oak Park and Cusack Realty in River Forest. The Cusack records are the ones that are mostly on index cards, like you see on the left, and they date back sometimes from the 1920s. But the great majority of what we have here is from the multiple listing service and date between the 1950s and the 1990s. So that's what you'll see on the right here. And on here, you'll find names of a lot of local realty firms like Glore, Pilgrim, Baird and Warner, Walsh, Gagliardo. That's just a couple of frequent names, some that you might recognize. And you maybe even bought your property from one of these groups. So although this will show my hand as a millennial, I'll just start out as explaining that these were indeed the way that you would learn of properties for sale before the internet changed that game. You would visit the realtor's office where you were shown these sales listings, including a description and most often a photo of the property. Otherwise, you could also look for listings in the newspaper, and I do mean paper, or you could opt for driving around your neighborhood of choice and look for sale signs in the yards. Except, of course, in Oak Park, where the use of these yard signs fell out of practice after the fair housing efforts of the 1970s. Since we're on that subject, I will just mention that some people think that for sale signs are illegal to put up in Oak Park, and that is not the case. In the early days of the fair housing efforts in Oak Park, they tried to make it illegal to put up for sale signs, and that was to prevent white flight and all of that sort of thing. But the higher up courts actually overturned that. So it's not technically illegal, it's just very not part of the culture of Oak Park. So it's very frowned upon to put up for sale signs. But that's a whole different topic. And if you want to learn more about that, please, I encourage you to visit the museum and take a look at our fair housing exhibit. We use these listings for a lot of different ways to research things, including finding names of previous owners or descriptions of the property at a given time, and hopefully a good clear photo. I, with that, emphasize the words hopefully and clear, because some listings do not include a photo, or sometimes even if they do, there might be a giant tree or a bush blocking a good view of what you need to see. But I love the feeling when a researcher comes in looking to make restorations on their house, and they want to see an earlier photo of what it would have looked like decades ago. And if we're able to find a good photo from the 1950s or 60s that shows some of the earlier features, that's sort of a holy grail moment for me. But not just that, I use these listings for a lot of different points of research. So for me, some of the other ways that these help me with research is like with identifying addresses. And I mean that to say it's kind of like an early version of Google Street View. So especially for me as a non-resident, a lot of times if somebody is talking about a specific house or like an area, if they're talking about Keystone and Oak, I'll sort of tuck back here and look into the real estate listings for that area, kind of see, okay, this is the house they're talking about, or this is what some of the houses on the block look like, just to give myself some orientation. They also often give a snapshot of changing businesses over time. And since they often list the name of the owner who is selling it at the time, they can help with family research as well to verify some dates of residence or details of family history. Another example for that is, say your grandfather owned a business on Lake Street, and you sort of know that he sold it in the 1960s. So we can go into these real estate listings and look for that address. Hopefully there may be one from when your grandfather sold the property. So it'll have his name on it. It'll have the date and the price that he sold it for. And maybe in the photo, it even has the business, like a sign on the window that says Grandpa's Candy Shop or whatever. So that can help a lot sometimes too. However, property listings can also show the darker side of our community's past. So one of the most startling examples that a researcher discovered while working with me to research their house was a simple line on the back of a listing from the 1950s that read "Gentiles only," meaning that the seller would not consider selling to Jews. It was probably specifically focused against Jews at the time because in the 1950s, I don't think they would have been thinking about Muslims or even maybe people of different races or religions. So this idea ties into the infamous M listings you may have heard of before. These are listings where you could opt out of showing your property for sale to lookers who were of minority. So sort of a way of preventing people of minority from purchasing homes. And although what you would see in the research center is not exactly the same as those listings, you can sometimes get a sense of that from here, obviously, what you see on the screen. But still sort of in the same idea, although not as stark. Sometimes you can get some other descriptive language that sugarcoats or masks the reality of a property. So I don't know if this says on here, but on a lot of listings for Oak Park and River Forest homes, they will very often give the age of the house as old. So not very helpful. And if your house in particular was listed as old like 40 years ago, I don't know where that leaves you now. So there's not a listing for every property, but the majority we can usually find something. But the ones that we can't, this can happen for many reasons. Like if the property was not listed through one of the local realtors, or perhaps the property was owned by the same person or family for generations and therefore had no listing to begin with. That happens surprisingly often in this community, and it's one of the things that I love the most to hear, that the same house has been owned for 3 generations. It happens more than you would expect, which is really special to, I think, attest to Oak Park and River Forest. So in that way, sometimes the lack of a listing can tell a really good story about the history of a home. However, the opposite is also true. Sometimes we have a stack of listing sheets for a particular house, and that usually happens if it's sold or turned over a lot. So you never can tell. And in that way, these listings are a very democratic representation of the history of a house. It's sort of blind to the eye of street gapers. So many people will come in to do research with me and say, my house is nothing special, so you probably don't have any information about it. And I love proving those people wrong, because even if your house doesn't look as captivating as some of the other ones in your neighborhood, it still has a captivating story. So for anyone who stops by the research center asking about a specific property, these listing sheets are usually what I reach for first. And I think everyone who lives or has lived in Oak Park or River Forest should see what listings we have for your property. They are my go-to starting point, but they are only just the start. So we have a lot of different resources to look at for the history of a property or a family or a business or any topic of interest. So again, I'd just like to remind everybody that if you are interested in researching anything local, then I would love to talk with you. So get in contact with me, and especially just to take a peek at these listings in particular. They're always interesting to find. So that is actually my presentation for today. So if anybody has any questions, I would love to see those in the chat box. And thank you all again for sharing your different types of places where you have lived in Oak Park or River Forest. Again, I'll just say that if I have slipped up and said house a couple too many times in this presentation, I do really mean that we have the ability to look at a lot of different things for apartment buildings or condos or businesses. And that sort of thing. Was everybody able to see my slides today as I was going through? It sounds like I had some issues with visuals. Okay, so sorry about that. It sounds like I did not have our slides today, but hopefully you were able to still sort of hear what I had to say. And all the more, that means that I'm glad I have some handouts, so to speak. I can show you some samples here of what our listings look like. So again, this is from Cusack Realtor, and it's sort of an index card of just a basic description of a house that's for sale. And it'll give you the price that it was sold for or selling for, and the date it was listed. This one has an owner's name on it as well, so that would be the owner who was selling it at the time, and that sort of thing. And then this is a multiple listings sheet. So sorry if I'm blocking myself, but this is sort of a half sheet of paper, and again, a good description of it when it was being sold. This one's from 1972, and it also has a photo on the back. So this is an example of what I would call a good photo, because you can really see the house, as opposed to there being a giant tree in the middle of the picture or anything like that. But that's a little taste of what I've been talking about. So sorry about the visuals, but I hope that was still helpful and interesting nonetheless. So I do have a question in the chat box as well. And please, if you want to ask me anything about what I have talked about today, put that in the chat box. Our question from Jan is everything on computers now at the offices? So at the real estate, like the realtor firms around here nowadays, I very much believe that all of this is done online or in the computers. And I am pretty sure, please don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of the reason why they gave these listings to us was because they did not need them at the offices. Like everything that they needed to know had already been sort of transferred onto computers, or just the current information that they need to be able to sell a house nowadays is digital. So this is, again, sort of the old school way of what they would have used for people who were purchasing a property, but now they're more historical records than anything. So I hope that helps a little bit. And I will, oh, thank you. So thank you for saying that my talk was still clear and informative even without slides. I will probably share some photos with you all on the call today, just so you can get a sampling of a couple of different things. Especially, I talked very specifically about a listing that, well, I talked about our listing that shows Gentiles only. And I think I would like to show you that because it's a very stark image to see, especially when you're not expecting it. Because that, again, was a surprise as I was doing research with this person who lives in this house. We were just sort of run of the mill going through all of the resources that we have here and looking at these listing sheets. There are probably a couple of different ones for this property. And to be able to read through all of this, and then on the very back, it just said Gentiles only, was a very stark sort of realization. So I might figure out how I can share that image with you all. But other than my rambling, I will end my talk here unless anybody has some questions. But I also want to plug an event that I know is coming up in the next couple of weeks here at the museum, or at least we are planning on here at the museum. We're having a speaker named Ijen who she's a very active, she's active in politics and with research, especially on like the aging community and sort of the different ways that generations are taking care of each other, looking towards sort of this boom of a lot of people growing into older ages, older than ever before. So I think her topic for discussion is going to be that, and she will be here at the museum on February 12th. That's a Saturday. So I would love to see you all here if possible. And we are planning on having it at the museum, but if we have to change our plans, it might be over Zoom. And if so, we will definitely let you all know on our website and social media and everything. But please look for that information about that event because it's going to be very exciting. So with that, I think I will thank you all again for coming and hearing a little more about one of the very special collections that we have in the museum. And I will see you all next time. Thank you.